Good morning and welcome back to the brand stage. And thank you very much for joining us. We have got an awesome session for you in the next 50 minutes. And we are fortunate to be joined by Orlando and Joe from Channel Advisor. I'm sure you know who Channel Advisor is, but for those who don't, Channel Advisor is a leading e-commerce cloud platform whose mission is to connect and optimize the world's commerce. For nearly 2 decades, Channel Advisor has helped brands and retailers worldwide to improve their online performance by expanding sales channels, connecting with consumers around the world, optimizing their operations for peak performance, and providing actionable analytics. And thousands of customers depend on Channel Advisor's technology to secure power with their sales and optimize fulfillment on channels such as eBay, Amazon, Facebook, Google, Walmart, and hundreds more. I'm going to hand over to the guys. Just a few things to point out. Please ask questions. It's really important that you get what you want out of this session. This session is for you. So ask questions in the chat box on the Totem platform as we go through. And then as we come towards the end, we will ask those questions to the guys and see if we can get those answers for you as well. I'd like to just also point out that the day is sponsored by Econ Motors. It's a fusion between technology and people to provide full end-to-end solution for aftermarket e-commerce manufacturers. Please visit the showcase of the presenters, Channel Advisor, and also Econ Motors during the course of the day as well. So that leaves me to introduce you to Orlando and Joe. So over to you guys.
Thanks, Andrew. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's session on retail diplomacy. We'll be talking about primarily how brands can manage channel conflict when selling direct. My name's Joe Williams. I'm the Senior Manager of Brand Solutions at Channel Advisor. So really looking forward to being here today and getting to speak in front of you today. I'll allow my colleague Orlando to quickly introduce himself and then we can jump into the presentation.
Yeah, g'day guys. I look after the shoppable media solution, which is one of our platform pieces. We'll talk about all of what Channel Advisor has to offer in today's session, but I will point out the shoppable media solution right towards the end.
Perfect. Thanks, Orlando. You could jump over to the next slide. So what are our objectives for today's session? Well, firstly, we believe that going direct to consumer for a brand should not only be a benefit for the brand, but it should also add value to a brand's retail partners. So during this presentation, our aim is firstly to help brands create a diplomatic approach to going D2C, to identify mutually beneficial partnership opportunities for brands and retailers, and to ensure brands can create more of a holistic foundation to their go-to-market strategy. We jump over to the next slide, Orlando. So why don't we start by taking a look at some of the common challenges that brands face when they think about launching a direct channel. And from our experience, one of the first questions that usually comes up is, what kind of impact will launching a D2C channel have on a brand's retail network? And how will the relationships between a brand and a retailer be affected, right? Because we know that can be quite a commercially sensitive relationship. So this will probably underpin most of the topics that we'll be discussing in today's presentation, as there is often maybe an assumption that going direct will actually cause channel conflict. Now, with the right approach, that doesn't have to be the case. So everything we discuss today will actually be focused on not only how to mitigate channel conflict, but also to make this more of a mutually beneficial proposition. Defining pricing strategies can also be quite difficult. So should the brand be priced competitively in the market? Will pricing competitively cause erosion in the market? What about if a brand decides to not price competitively? What other ways are there to differentiate their products in the D2C store? What about fulfillment and infrastructure options? All of which need a considerable amount of time and investment to put in place, right? So once all of this is in place, a lot of brands will often struggle to avoid internal conflict between maybe their e-commerce teams, who are responsible for D2C revenue only, and maybe the channel teams who will naturally be responsible for retail revenue. And lastly, we're going to be talking about internal departments or maybe external partner relationships and the concern of potential channel cannibalization. That frequently comes up. So, will the success of a D2C store mean that the brand is taking away share from its retail partners? And look, there are many other challenges along the way, but these are some of the reoccurring themes that we see, and that when addressed early on, they can positively impact the shape and direction of a brand's e-commerce journey. Jump over to the next slide. So Channel Advisor has had a lot of experience working with brands as they define and roll out e-commerce programs globally. And we've looked at what are the common themes the brands who have been successful with a D2C channel have taken, while at the same time strengthening their valued established retail channels. And we've tried to summarize this in 3 pillars that we'll be talking through today. So first of all, we'll be looking at the importance of communication, right? Communication both internally and externally of the organization. We'll then be looking at how to share success and ensure that all channels benefit from a brand launching D2C. And lastly, we'll be looking at what are the best ways to leverage infrastructure, both at the brand and retailers and maybe third parties. Next slide. All right, so let's jump into the communication section. Before you do anything else, I think it can be really helpful to define an organizational structure with a focus on being channel neutral. And what do we mean by channel neutral? Well, it's common for brands. It's common for a brand's e-commerce team to exclusively focus on their direct channel, right? And usually they are incentivized by performance of that channel only. So this can be a bit of a challenge in itself. That while early on it may seem relatively small or not that significant, over time there can be a bit of a ripple effect with this. So what we often end up seeing is that this can lead to somewhat of a conflict of interest between the e-commerce team and the retail channel team. And that can impact pricing downstream, performance, collaboration, and many other things which we don't need to go to in detail yet. So the recommendation here is to, if possible, make the e-commerce function incentivized for both direct and indirect sales, which will ultimately ensure the team's objectives don't conflict or they're not competing. So if we think about, say, the regional or country business units, they should be incentivized to support both direct and indirect business. And at the same time, the e-commerce department should be incentivized to also drive indirect channel sales leads, both online and in store, to retail partners. When we talk about this kind of channel neutral organizational structure, the next thing to think about is, how does this translate into the consumer journey? How does an e-commerce department that is responsible for both direct and indirect sales benefit the customer when they're on the brand website or maybe other media touch points where you're marketing your products? Well, we'll be going to this in a bit more detail later on in the presentation, but taking this approach will ultimately lead to an e-commerce experience which is primarily focused on customer choice without pushing a particular agenda on the customer, right? So, for example, we see brands offering the customer the choice to either buy direct from the brand or an online retailer or even a physical retailer store, all from a single e-commerce experience on their website or other touch points. So really focusing on helping the customer purchase in the most convenient way possible, regardless of the channel. Now, another important step to define is to define the goals for the direct channel and then prioritize internal briefing and communication. For example, what do we mean by this? Well, some brands are looking at their D2C store as purely a sales opportunity, whereas other brands might be looking at it as an opportunity to gain more insight, maybe to develop more closer, meaningful relationships with its consumers. And of course, a lot of brands sit somewhere in between. So be clear on the objective from the outset, right? And it's okay to have different objectives depending on where a brand is in its e-commerce journey as well. Once that's been defined, I personally can't really overstate the importance of internal communication and briefings. So make sure that everyone in the organization is clear on not only the reason why the brand is taking this direction, but also to make sure you avoid the wrong messages being communicated to retailers. For example, communication may need to be different for a brand who is viewing their direct channel as primarily a sales driver, compared to a brand who is more interested in maybe gaining insight and building relationships with the consumer that we mentioned. And this approach will ultimately help make sure that you have consistent messaging and avoid potentially damaging quotes that might come out in the media that would impact those relationships that you have with your retailers. Jump over to the next slide. Now, once the external communication has started and that's taking place, and discussions with your retailers have begun, take the opportunity to listen and be open to feedback that you get from your retailers. You might actually end up uncovering some valuable opportunities in these discussions. You might maybe gain more insight, which can ultimately help you prioritize your roadmap and even get ahead of any potential concerns that come up from the retailer that you might not have seen otherwise. So, for example, you might gain valuable insight into product ranges or categories that you might want to either avoid going when you start selling D2C or perhaps focus on more exclusively. Maybe certain product lines are not selling well at particular retailers, which might give you a low risk starting point that minimizes disruption to your retail channel. The other thing to consider is that you might also find some retailers are very supportive and actually quite surprised you didn't do this sooner, whereas other retailers might be concerned because your products represent a large share of their revenue. So it's really better to have these discussions early on, and it can just ensure you avoid any surprises, I guess. When it comes to price, the product pricing, the recommendation is to always stick to recommended retail price on your D2C store. The customers who end up visiting a brand website are typically going to be more interested in service rather than price. And this gives you the opportunity to differentiate without competing on price. So there is another added benefit, and that is that ultimately you can help your sales teams to better justify RRP with your retailers if you're upholding that price. So what can you do instead? Well, firstly, focus on service-based promotions is a key recommendation instead of pricing discounts. You could look at maybe adding additional services that the brand offers that retailers won't, perhaps premium aftercare that you could include. It could be that you offer free shipping or perhaps even exclusive bundles or maybe even new product lines. And these are all ways that you can, again, differentiate without using price as an example. And this will be yet another way for you to continue to reduce the risk of causing conflict with your retail partners as you successfully roll this out. Whenever you do decide to run promotions, one, I guess, key recommendation is to manage the internal communication of this as early as possible. So give your channel or your retail teams early updates on the promotional activity that you're planning to run on the D2C store. This will help you and them get ahead of any potential challenges, such as maybe a conflicting promotion that's out there with your retailers that are running in parallel, and make sure that it doesn't negatively impact certain commercial negotiations that might be taking place at that time. The final point in this section is about being clear that your direct channel should represent an opportunity to grow all channels. By investing in developing a direct channel, the brand can actually increase the investment and support to its retailers through benefits such as referring them sales leads. Could be online, could be in store, could be supporting them with additional content to improve the brand experience online and to improve their conversions. Could be greater insight into consumer behavior and product performance, and even an opportunity to leverage some of the brand's infrastructure to help your retailer. So in short, I think that the key thing is that there is a lot of opportunity for shared success, and that this should be a win-win program that removes any risk of potential channel cannibalization. And that should be the core of the communication. Next slide. So if you want to jump over to the next one, Orlando. So we believe that as a brand goes D2C, right, it should be a fantastic opportunity for both the brand and the retailer. And this section we're going to be covering now is how you can actually share success with the retailer. So as a brand, it's important to recognize that there is somewhat of a symbiotic relationship between your D2C initiative and your retail network. And doing this will make it easier to develop a marketing approach that amplifies success for all participants and not just the brand or the retailer. And that's why we see it, as I mentioned, as a win-win for both parties, right? If you succeed at D2C, your retailer should succeed as well. D2C shouldn't be a replacement for your retail partners, and it should actually complement your existing channels and overall sales. We know that channel diversification is key for growth. So you can use this as a real opportunity at the beginning to make it something that the retailer can actually benefit from. And I guess, well, how do we define that, right? What are some of the ways that the retailer can benefit? Well, if we recognize that it is a important symbiotic relationship, you can then make sure that any of your e-commerce buttons, for example, on your website, promote all channels equally. And this means that your D2C channel is visible alongside your online retailers or physical stores. So when a customer is visiting your website, they should be able to see maybe a find an online retailer section or a find a retail store option, which is sitting next to wherever you allow them to add the product to cart on your store. And from our experience, brands who have maybe decided to go D2C and remove their retailer options from their website to focus exclusively on D2C actually saw a negative impact across all of their channels, because in theory, they were essentially removing choice from the customer that was a valuable component for them visiting the website in the first place. So having both direct and retailer options on the website should incrementally contribute to your growth, and just bear in mind that they shouldn't be cannibalizing each other. We also see brands who take more of a dynamic approach to this, to the visibility on their website, and they even display retailer options automatically whenever their D2C store goes out of stock for a particular product, right? So they can always ensure that a customer has an option to buy, even though the preferred route for the brand is that they buy direct. The next thing we recommend is to define a partner program with your retailers. Now, of course, many of you will probably already have some kind of partner program in place with your retailers. But from our experience, we see the brands that heavily rely on their account managers to maintain their relationships with contacts at the retailer side have somewhat of a risk in this area. You can imagine this can be a risk if somebody leaves the business, or maybe even if you're trying to align communication across all of your retailers, you're having to do that through single points of contact. So we always encourage brands to formalize right from the outset how they plan to work and support their retailers once they initiate a D2C strategy. So that's really about creating a framework where the brand can introduce goals, expectations of the retailer, and maybe position that alongside any rewards or privileges that will be on offer for the retailer as well. So let's look at a few examples of what might be included, right? What could be included in a successful partner program to help the brand and the retailer? Firstly, looking at maybe outlining customer experience, product content, aftercare terms, so that there are clear expectations on what kind of experience you would like for your customers when they visit your retail partners. This helps you make sure that your brand guidelines are being followed and your content is showcased in the right way. So that's a key thing you can include. In exchange for that, the brand can then talk about co-marketing activity as part of the program. You know, as a brand, you'll most likely have allocated budget for all of your retailers, and the marketing activity that you'll be running maybe isn't always, you're not always aware of what happens to that spend, right? So within a partner program, you can be clear on the type of campaigns that you'll be running and how you'll be including retailers in your marketing calendar, at what points and at what campaigns, and have a real clear expectation of that from the outset. Another element to consider would be a traffic referral program. So this is really just an opportunity to include multiple purchase options for your retailers on your website, or again, anywhere where you're marketing your products, so that you can begin to refer valuable sales leads to your retailers in appropriate situations. And doing this actually also shows a really strong message of support to your retailers. And ultimately, really your priority should just be making it as easy as possible for customers to find and buy your products, right? If it's with your D2C store, great. If it's through a retailer and the customer just wants to buy through a retailer, then at least you can make sure they're directed to the right place at the right time. The last point is around shared analytics, and this can be really valuable for both parties. So this should be a key part, and it should be viewed as a two-way street. So leveraging shared analytics can help both parties increase sales, offer a better consumer experience. And when we talk about analytics, we're really talking about things like performance by media channel, performance by media type, conversion rates, product popularity. And again, it's really worth focusing on that ask from both parties at the beginning and formalizing that. So in the next couple of slides, we're going to start talking about some examples and showing you some examples of how brands have implemented this approach to grow their D2C channel. If you want to jump over to the next slide. Here is an example on the AEG website, right? So this is one of Electrolux's brands in the home appliance category. You can see on their product detail page, as expected from a brand that sells direct, there's an add to cart button, which is above the fold of the page. So this is a fully transactional website, and AEG sells direct to the consumer, as you can see. But as you can imagine, not all customers are going to be wanting to buy direct from the brand. Might be they have a particular loyalty with a certain retailer. Maybe even this product on the next time you visit the website isn't in stock, right? So how do they account for that? Well, if you scroll down below the fold, and that's it, next slide, you'll see some links to online retailers that are currently available. And if you click on any of those retailers, you're actually linked directly to the product page on the retailer website. So you're bypassing any of the competitor offers or maybe avoiding the risk of landing on a page that isn't in stock, right? If the customer maybe just wants to see the product in person, they also have the option to find a store where they can locate a retailer and visit the brick and mortar store. So that's a really good example of a channel neutral implementation. And you can see that just because a brand's going direct to consumer doesn't have to be that it's exclusive of marketing to your retailers. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to Orlando. He's going to go into more detail around how the D2C store can become a value proposition. And we've got some other examples from brands to talk to you as well. So appreciate your time. Orlando, if you want to take over. I think you might be on mute, Orlando. Maybe that's just mine.
Yeah, we can't hear you, Orlando.
I am unmuted. It's better now.
Fantastic. Yeah,
there you go.
Back in
Perfect.
the room. Thanks.
All right, appreciate that. My heart started to absolutely pump, so I'm glad that we got there. As Joe mentioned, so we were covering off some of the shared successes that a program like D2C can bring to the retailers. And it sounds almost counterintuitive when you first think about it. But ideally, what we're thinking about for the retailer's perspective is that at the end of the day, the retailers just want to be able to sell more products and more of your products. So how are they going to be benefiting from your direct-to-consumer store? Well, there's a couple of ways. The first is that typically what happens in an organization when they first launch their D2C store, or as they start to improve their D2C store over time, is that they invest in their website. Their website will often be the first point of call for a typical customer, and to learn more about the product and learn more information about that particular brand. That investment in content creation, in being able to collect customer information, such as for a newsletter, for an email marketing campaign, allows them to be able to become more of a conduit to the end consumer, which at the end of the day allows the retailer to be able to position their product. How does the retailer benefit from this? Well, if they're positioned next to the brand that has the improved website, the improved email marketing campaigns, the improved social media campaigns, well, that just brings traffic to those retailers. And at the end of the day, those free qualified sales leads, they are qualified if customers going through and clicking on buy now in the way that Joe showed us for AEG. They're qualified because they're clicking on buy now, and they're coming to that end site. I'd also implore you to think about existing customers or customers who are returning, as opposed to or in a different category to net new customer acquisition. The value proposition for the brand and retailer, depending on the products that are being sold, can typically differ between trying to find new customers and trying to convert repeat purchases. What I mean by this is that typically trying to convince the customer for the first time is often the most difficult part. And I think about an example for me was recently we've purchased a house and we're looking for a lawnmower for out the back. And for me, the net new customer acquisition is which brand of lawnmower should I go for? Because it's not just the lawnmower that you end up buying, it's all the accessories and the things that are going to go into the end garden. And so for the brand's perspective, they're heavily marketing to try and bring you on board for that first purchase, because they know that the existing, once you're an existing customer, you'll go ahead and buy their accessories and buy all the rest of the products that come along with home and garden. And at the end of the day, that's what benefits the retailers. So I'd implore you to think about that trade-off. And lastly, we think about the access to more data that, as Joe has mentioned, can work both ways. The analytics that you receive from the marketing campaigns that you're able to provide, and being able to tap into the keywords and audiences that will be beneficial to both the brand, but also the retailer, and get into a way that can do that in a safe and private way, so that you're not using customer data in a way that would be illegal or nefarious, but at the end of the day allows both the retailer and the business to be able to benefit. Let me turn my attention then to some of the more obvious as well, value propositions for the retailer. At the end of the day, they want to increase sales, as I mentioned before. But let's think about that in a slightly more nuanced way, in that retailers typically, their hardest job, the hardest position that they have is trying to find new customers. And as I mentioned, you want to be able to send those potential leads to those retailers. You also want to leverage the skill set of the brand. What we mean by this is that typically the brand will know their audiences better than anybody, whilst the retailer might focus on many brands, many audiences, many products, and that's their value proposition, is the one-stop shop. The brand is the best at being able to cut through the noise and tell the message of the brand and know which audiences to go after. And by taking both of those skill sets together, the fact that customers trust the retailers, but that the brands are better at talking to them, you're able to leverage both skill sets of both the brand and the retailer. And lastly, sort of touching on the Channel Advisor platform for a moment, is extending the shopping aisle in a far wider way than just the retailer is able to be able to deliver on. What we mean by this is that typically the retailers will purchase a subset of the products that a brand is able to offer. Maybe the hero SKUs and maybe some accessories that go along with that. They typically won't purchase the full range. Where the brand can step in is on that extended range, be able to provide either via a dropship program or through their own infrastructure, the ability to send that customer out a direct order. So the customer can shop on the retailer side, but receive the delivery from the brand itself. I want to turn our attention for a moment to advertising and why this is so important for the retailer. And I'll start by introducing to the audience that at the end of the day, our digital ad spend is only increasing. It's increasing as a wider amount, a larger amount year on year, and that's obvious. But it's also widening from the perspective of wallet share for businesses. Are they spending on digital advertising, or are they spending on media and advertising in a traditional format such as radio or TV? Both are increasing. And so it becomes increasingly more expensive to tap into your audiences, and typically more competitive as a result, because you've got more and more brands who are spending more and more money on advertising. So cutting through that noise, and to touch on a point that I brought up earlier, to cut through that noise requires some sophistication, some thought, which the brand is able to bring to the table. The retailers typically will not know exactly how to sell that end brand. Related to this is, in a typical world as digital marketers, we think of a sales funnel in digital advertising typically is something similar to what I have on the screen today. So awareness, consideration, conversion, and loyalty. And the idea is that as digital marketers, we want to get consumers through that sales funnel. And if we put in as many people at the top of that funnel, they'll drop their way down through our marketing messages, buy and come back and be loyal, and perhaps even spread the word and help consumers buy on and on. But we don't, as marketers, what we're finding from the data is that typically consumers are not so linear. They don't just come into an awareness category, then end up in a consideration phase, then end up converting, then end up being loyal. In fact, many consumers will bounce their way through these phases over a very long period of time. And if you follow some of your consumers over years and years, you'll find that they have bouts of being loyal, bouts of being considerate in your brand, in your purchase. And so at Channel Advisor, we really proposition that because consumers have such varied consumer journeys, and also because there's more channels to tap into than ever before and more retailers to tap into ever before, that rather than thinking about the consumer journey so linearly as a sales funnel, to really just make sure that it's available to be purchased at any point in time. No matter whether you've got a marketing message going out on email marketing, you've got social media advertising, that no matter where they're ready to purchase from, they're either able to purchase from your direct-to-consumer website or they're able to purchase from a retailer, and let the consumer make the choice as to where they would like to go ahead and make a purchase. So what can this look like in a real life scenario? Well, take an advertisement like the headphones that we're looking at here in front of us, and it doesn't have to be particularly complicated. If you have a headphone advertisement, add a buy now button to that advertisement, and then make sure that there's some options that when you click on buy now, that can actually be purchased from today. So have your site maybe as the top option, in the same way that Joe recommended or had AEG as the example, it's shown first, but then a bunch of retailers underneath where you can go through and make a purchase. And similarly with the display advertisement, rather than just showing the product, make it really obvious that your retailers are part of your consumer journey so that consumers can go ahead and make a purchase today. So let me summarize the shared success with one last point, which is around channel optimization. At the end of the day, your brand has some strength in being able to connect with your end customers because you know the consumers better than ever before. But so your retailers also have their own strengths in being able to have their loyalty programs with their retail customers, or perhaps better shipping and better trust with their end consumers. So really think about the audiences and think about how you're going to optimize for conversion, both for your D2C, but also for your retailers. Make sure you're tracking this over time. We also suggest make sure that you're sending out great content and optimizing this for conversion with your retailers too. And test and learn when we think about content. Perhaps some retailers get a version of content, and another bunch of retailers get B version of content. And on your website, you try out a few different versions. And at the end of the day, you're optimizing to your conversion. Think about your inventory and whether you want your best performing SKUs to sit with D2C or whether you want it to sit with your retailers, and can absolutely play around with how you think about product selection and product depth. And lastly, when we talked about marketing, some of the examples that I showed, ensure that you're trying to test this out from a new product perspective, testing out different innovations from your messaging, and really workshop some of those ideas with your retailers. I want to finish off with our last sort of pillar in balancing D2C and retail partners, and that's to leverage your infrastructure. And I did sort of touch on it from a channel optimization in regards to ensuring that your strengths complement the strengths of your retailers and vice versa. It's not always going to make sense from a margin perspective, from a customer acquisition perspective, or a cost perspective, for you to go and tap into every single audience and tap into every single product. Perhaps your retailers might actually have some cost benefits to shipping the product out on your behalf. So when you think about direct to consumer on your website, can you leverage their strength to perhaps initiate the order on your website, but actually get it fulfilled by the retailer and work in a partnership for some of your markets, or vice versa, as we mentioned with a drop ship program. Also think about all of the margin expectations for things like shipping, which only get more expensive over time. And perhaps even in some countries where connecting up to carriers and couriers requires some level of volume, and that perhaps is going to be difficult for you to be able to tap into. Also think about what the customer expectations are in regards to that too. There's no point in having a beautiful D2C web store and then not meeting the expectations of shipping and fulfillment, where customers only get disappointed, disgruntled, and blow up your customer care. We also suggest think about payment methods, and this becomes really important from a cross-border trade perspective, especially thinking that, where we're so used to paying with Amex and MasterCard and Visa in the UK, a lot of these programs, as you look out to the rest of the world, especially through Asia or Latin America, still use cash on delivery and perhaps require you to think about the different ways to tap into those ecosystems, and your retailers will have some of that set up already. And think about really just streamlining how that infrastructure is going to work. Lastly, how can you guys benefit from both the retailer and the brand's perspective? And summarizing here, you want to create those mutually beneficial partnerships and really think about this not just from a program perspective, as Joe's mentioned, but also contractual perspective to make sure that both sides are keeping their promises. We also suggest that you want to leverage some of the research online, purchase offline type of consumer journeys that are starting to occur, and perhaps not even just starting to occur, but are only accelerating, especially as consumers start to get out now after the pandemic and are wanting to go into retail stores, even just to support their local community. How can you tap into making sure that they are actually purchasing your products when they're going into those stores, and really thinking about some of those strengths that those partner stores may have, or whether it's a shop-in-shop experience. To conclude, you also want to be thinking about helping your retailers to get the right product to the end customer by enabling programs like drop shipping, as we talked about. And all of this can be summarized in great performance analytics data so that you can optimize for conversion. I'll turn the attention then to Joe for a quick summary of everything that we've talked about. We'll then give you a short overview of Channel Advisor and finish off with some questions. So please feel free to drop into the chat if you have any questions.
Cool, thank you. And a quick thumbs up just to make sure you can still hear me okay. Perfect, all right. Before I jump into this summary, thank you everyone so far for all of the questions that are coming in. I'm seeing these in the chat and we've got some really good questions, so I'm looking forward to answering these at the end. But with regards to the summary, so there's quite a few points that we've discussed. Just a quick recap on the main points and takeaways that we'd like to leave you with. Number one, we're suggesting that you focus on creating a channel neutral organizational structure, meaning that e-commerce and retail teams are both incentivized to grow direct and indirect revenue, right? So that's a really key one from us. Next is communicate your goals early and often with retailers. Do it as early as possible and listen out for any potential opportunities or feedback or concerns that come up. Thirdly, don't compete on price with your retailers and instead focus on service and providing additional value as part of the consumer experience. Focus on consumer choice. So include all of your e-commerce, include in your e-commerce experience online and offline retail stores, as well as your D2C channel, and try and make that more of kind of a single e-commerce experience, right? And definitely prioritize your retailers when your website is out of stock. Give the retailers the opportunity. Enable your retailers to sell your products by delivering rich media content and delivering them highly qualified sales leads and data and insight, right? So that's going to help them elevate their e-commerce capabilities and help them convert more customers. Once you've created that partner program that we've mentioned, or if you've already got one in place, optimize regularly, right? Do that with your retailers, optimize regularly, don't stop improving. It should be an ongoing iterative process. D2C should create a larger share of the pie for everyone, right? And it should be there to help grow all channels. So it's not just a channel for the brand, even though it's your store. And lastly, optimize all of your infrastructure and logistics, customer care and consumer experience, as Orlando mentioned. Before we open up for questions, I know we've given you some, I guess, general recommendations and some quite broader business suggestions. A lot of you might be wondering, where does Channel Advisor sit in that mix? What can we help you with? So Orlando's just going to give you a quick overview of our platform and how we help brands, and then we'll wrap up and answer questions.
Sure, thanks, Joe. And I have noticed there's some questions that are coming through that actually I can answer with the screen in front of us in terms of what Channel Advisor does. There's really 6 modules to Channel Advisor's proposition. Thinking about the consumer journey, starting from digital marketing, where we can help brands to connect up to places like Google Shopping, Amazon advertising, Facebook, all of the major digital marketing channels, and send out to those places your product data to be able to help position your product and the right messaging, but also optimizing the campaigns from a budget's perspective. Related to digital marketing is our shoppable media solution in regards to acquiring customers from the brand website, such as the solution that Joe showed for AEG and the solutions that I showed for your different display advertising and marketing. At the end of the day, receiving back great analytics is part of the proposition. We have a full suite of dashboards to be able to help you to do that. Next, we have marketplaces, first party and fulfillment, which are tools to help you to be able to send product data out to places like Amazon and eBay, and really focus on new customer acquisition on those channels to drive new customers to your brand with some sophisticated tools for competing with different sellers that are there, but also to receive back from an order management perspective any of the data that will allow you to go and ship out to the customer and do that efficiently and effectively with all different career programs. And lastly, we have a new tool to our suite recently acquired last year, which is Brand Analytics. It allows you to be able to track any of the retailers in regards to what they're doing from a digital shelf perspective. So the titles, descriptions, photos, whether they're in stock, what the pricing is of their products. And then you can go and make decisions on how you run your digital marketing campaigns, shop media campaigns, so on and so forth, from the information that you have on how your retailers are performing. With that, I guess let's turn to questions.
Yeah, great. Thanks, gents, for those insights. Some really interesting information there. We do have quite a lot of questions, so and I've been told that we've got to stop dead on time. So I'm going to go through these questions, trying to get through all of them. If we could try and keep the answers to around about a minute, that would be great. So the first one is, much of the channel conflict comes from lack of transparency between the brands and the retailer. Do you have any tips that you haven't already mentioned, or examples on how to share data appropriately?
Yeah, I can grab that one.
So that. Great.
Yeah, I'll take that, Andrew. So that's a really good question. Maybe I'll give you an example from both sides, right? From a brand and a retailer. If a brand is seeing a retailer have significantly lower conversion rate, as an example, compared to that of its competitors, by the retailer sharing that conversion data with the brand, it gives the brand the opportunity to say, okay, look, I've identified an opportunity to help you improve your conversion rate. And maybe that's because the retailer doesn't have the right content or the right brand experience. So all of a sudden, the brand can now invest money for that retailer to help them improve their conversion rate. On the flip side, if a brand is maybe sharing all of the leads with its retail partners and has data on that, it can help the retailer identify opportunities such as, why are we not getting any leads? And that could be simply because they have stock issues, right? If the retailer might just not be aware that they're selling out of stock quickly on a certain product or category. So 2 examples. I mean, there are a lot, but as you can see, it all helps just create that collaborative effort from both sides.
Great. Thank you, Joe, for that. Let's move on to the next question. What about promotional arrangements? For example, if a retailer agrees to sell support discount from one retailer. So, for example, John Lewis, they're well known for their extra guarantee, free detergents, with Selfridges, a few examples there. there's no place to set out the differential. For example, when you looked at that AEG slide, when you just have 4 retailers in a box and try and guide the consumer to click one of those. Could you give us kind of your view on that?
I think the AEG example was just one for an illustrative purpose, and the audience is absolutely right. There's no point. There's no differentiation between the retailers that's spelt out to the consumer there. But you can absolutely add what we would call a marketing message, where you can add details such as, Amazon has the Prime program, or John Lewis you get your, maybe there's an extra 5,000 points to your loyalty card. Whatever you like to put in there, you can add there. I'd also recommend to think about this as not just the promotional arrangement where you need to go and set that up, but there's also just some value in having the retailer logo there. As a consumer myself, when I see Amazon, I know I have the Prime program with them, so I know there's going to be fast shipping. I don't need to be told that as a promotional message.
I quickly
sorry.
So I was just going to add on to that. Absolutely right. We can add maybe high-level retailer promotions, and that would serve the John Lewis example, right? John Lewis offer extended guarantee. But you can also even introduce product-specific promotions. And in some cases, you can do that at a store level. So there's absolutely room for that in experiences like what you saw on the AEG website.
Yeah, and I would add, most people would click all the boxes to actually see what promotions come up as well from that point of view. Okay, just moving on. We've got about 3 minutes left. Do you have metrics on the quantity of net new customers that are driven? And I know you touched on the final slide about analytics, so it'd be good to kind of define that on this question.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you look at the analytics that are available from your website and what you're able to see from the audience partners, like if you're advertising on Facebook or TikTok or Google, you need a way that can pull in from Facebook or Google through to your website, through to the actual retailer who purchases, whether that person went through that wholesale cycle and converted. And that's what our tools are able to help with. How you break that out then into whether this is new customer or whether it's an existing customer goes back to the original source. So you can go from within TikTok and say, well, these audiences ended up purchasing, these audience didn't purchase, these were new to the brand, these were not new to the brand. Therefore, our new customer acquisition was 3% for this particular campaign, or whatever the percentage is. But it's definitely a part of our tool to be able to provide you with that sales analytics data so you can get really deep into your audiences and work out whether you're performing at an increased rate or whether that's moving in a negative way.
Great. And I think you've touched on the next question, actually, about customer acquisition. Can Channel Advisor help with bringing new customers to the merchant?
Sure. And yeah, to that point, we also have that service to be able to do that on your behalf. Or if you work with an agency or you have an in-house team, we can make our tools available for you to do that on your own. I do recognize there's a bunch of other questions, and we are getting towards the end of the session. What I'd highly implore anyone in the audience who hasn't had their question answered today is, one, definitely reach out to Joe or myself, and feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn. You can also go to channeladvisor.co.uk or channeladvisor.com and fill in a demo request or a contact us request, and we're more than happy to spend 10 minutes or an hour if you need it to be able to answer some of your questions.
One last question then, and then we're going to have to wrap up. How can you ensure that everyone's data is confidential? You have data on sales, on conversion effectiveness, which helps, but how do you kind of build those walls in place?
Sure, I can take that. So we're of course GDPR compliant, but specifically when we're looking at conversion data. Just from an architectural standpoint, all of the data that we have is segmented by brand, right? So whenever we get, for example, conversion rate data back from a retailer, it's only specifically stored in the area of the database for that brand in question, right? So a customer wouldn't be able to access conversion rate on behalf of another brand just because they're connected with us. So it's very segmented in our system, even to the point where different teams will work on different categories and retailers and things of that nature.
Thank you, Joe. So that's been a really good session, and thank you for answering those questions, both Orlando and Joe. As Orlando mentions, please go and visit the Supplier Showcase. Channel Advisors got a virtual booth there. You can ask questions there, or if you've got a specific question for Orlando or Joe, leave a message and they'll be able to reach back out to you as well. That's been a great session, and we've got some equally great sessions this afternoon as well on the brand track. After the lunch break, we've got Patton to talk about brands as well. Again, please use the lunchtime session to go and visit all the sponsors and all the partners on the showcases. We'll be back after the lunch break, and looking forward to the sessions then, or visit one of the other streams or stages that are ongoing. But thank you very much for your time. Thank you for your great questions, and thank you to Channel Advisor for the great presentation.